Come and have a seat.
Thank you.
Hello everybody, welcome. Hope you've had a good morning. Now, you got a brief introduction then, but for those who don't know us, Indira is an ABC broadcaster, the host of ABC Evenings, and also now the host of Compass as well, which is very exciting. And her most recent book is The Space Between the Stars. It's a beautiful book. If you haven't read it, I urge you to go out and buy it and read it. It's lovely and going really well, about to get a big publicity overseas as well. Yeah. So give Indira a big round of applause. We're going to be,
thank you.
We're going to be talking about how your workplace can help you be creative and heal. But I thought I'd start, Indira. How, you've recently, now you're really back at ABC full time. You're there 5 days a week. So. And I've just recently left ABC, being there full time, and I'm now working for myself. But when you're in that workplace environment, newsrooms are not necessarily the most friendly of environments or necessarily creative. What are the little things that you've done to try to bring creativity to your workplace?
Well, Sophie, it's so important to me because one of the things that I've discovered in maybe the last 15 years of my work life, my creative life, is that so many of the spaces that we put ourselves in are anti-creative and are largely because they don't embrace nature. And I discovered quite accidentally when I was working with climate change and global food programs with the UN, and came back to Potts Point in Sydney and realised that I was part of the problem, that I lived in the city in an apartment and I didn't have any greenery around me at all. I didn't even have any pot plants. But I had this balcony, so I converted it into a vegetable garden in the sky, and it brought greenery into my life and bird life and insects, but also led to a book, which is a very creative endeavour, called The Edible Balcony. And then a second book called The Edible City, because I used those principles of greening urban spaces, growing your own food, and helped communities like the Wayside Chapel, the homeless community, build a rooftop vegetable garden. Again, it was a community endeavour, but it was a creative one. We grew food, we made food, I wrote a book about it. And so those principles have really made me realise that even when we live in uninspiring urban settings or workplaces that can be a bit bland and grey and dull, like this space is, that we can still make them creative and still bring nature into them. So that's what I try to do. So in my workplace at the ABC, yes, it's pretty grey, it's pretty dull. And we are lucky, we've got a terrace in our building, but when you're working hourly deadlines with radio, it can be really difficult to get out into that space. So one of the things I've been doing, especially because younger generations are connecting with planting and growing and nature much more in the city than our generation maybe had, is I get cuttings of some of my indoor plants at home and on my balcony. And I've been finding old jars in the kitchen cupboards at work and just putting little cuttings in jars in water and greening my space that way and the workplace around me that way, and just quietly sort of introducing them. And it's been really surprising how that's been sparking conversations with people. And then other people have been bringing in cuttings as well. And what I love is we're getting greenery in our news spaces at work, but it's very low maintenance. They don't require soil, they don't require much light, and everyone is now engaged with these plants and they're looking forward to coming to work, looking for a new bud or a new leaf forming, and it's giving us another reason to come to work, which has been a challenge, I know, in workplaces, to encourage workers to come back into the workplace and give you a reason why not to stay at home. Because I loved being at home a lot of the time because I had my green space, my balcony, I had the park, the Royal Botanic Gardens down the road, where I found this beautiful fig tree that I write about in The Space Between the Stars. And having these little pot plants growing around the office And the conversations they're sparking has been a wonderful way for us to then spark our creativity, because it gives us an incidental reason. We're talking about the plants, but then we
you might start talking about
an idea for a show or a story idea, and it's happening very organically. Rather than it being structured,
like
here's a meeting.
Here's a plant program. Everyone's got to bring in a plant tomorrow.
I hate those programs where you have to do this and we're all going to be this and we're going to split up in teams. I'm the sort of person, my creativity is not like that. I don't like it to be structured like that. And so I love the fact that I'm just gently doing this and other people then are joining if they want to. And then the people that it works for, we're having these other connections and conversations, sometimes not about plants or nature, but about just standing around those little green plants. And that's helping then strengthen our creative bonds and giving us other ideas.
I think what's really nice about that idea is sometimes we do think you need to have like a big grand gesture, like you said, like a formal. You're much more likely to be engaged with something. Those small gestures can actually make a bigger difference of just thinking, and that's much more achievable as well. If you think about like just bringing in a little cutting in a little jar and watching it grow, rather than thinking, oh, okay, now we better bring in like a greening our workspace program.
Yeah, exactly.
So sometimes thinking about the smallest little change or the smallest little initiative you can bring in to reach the same goal as a big initiative, but it's actually a lot more achievable.
Yeah, and it then leads to the bigger conversations, because now some of our colleagues are saying, why don't we have our own green space or a little balcony area or more plants or whatever it might be. So it's sparking those conversations. The other lovely thing that I did recently, Sophie, again, you know, most of our day is very high pressured, lots of deadlines. The importance of the nature of the stories we're telling can put a lot of pressure on us as well. And so I find it's really good to sometimes diffuse that, and nature again is a lovely way of doing that. I recently did a road trip up the north and south coast with my husband, and I collected lots of beautiful seashells and pebbles, as some of you might do when you go on holiday. And what I did is, I'm pretty obsessed with those little miniature figurines that you get, and what I've been doing in a way to capture the memories associated with those shells and stones is I've been making little dioramas, and I've just been gluing little figures on these shells and stones. Again, nothing to do with what I'd normally do in my work, and taking them into work for my colleagues. So a little figure on a shell may represent how I look at a particular colleague, and they've been really touched by it, and they have them on their desks now. And I love the fact that nature, I've got a way of having those bits of nature around me, around my office space, so it sparks the holiday memories, which is really good as well, so they keep on keeping on. It's a little bit of creativity, it's a little bit of connection with my colleagues, it's making them feel special and connected to me as well. But again, they're all little bits of nature, you know, all those pebbles and shells that are around in the workplace.
And one thing I wanted to chat to you, I know with your new role as the host of Compass, that show really focuses on, you know, meaning and what brings a sense of meaning in life, which is something that I think, you know, is really at the heart of wellness, is finding a sense of meaning, whether it's at work or whether it's in your other parts of your life. But given we're sort of talking about work, how do you find meaning in the work that you do, and how do you, particularly when things are challenging, you know, because when things are going well, it's easy to find the meaning, it's easy to think about the purpose and why you're doing what you're doing. But I think having a sense of meaning becomes really crucial when things get more challenging. And that's when we need to sort of dig deeper and think, what really is my sense of the meaning and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So what works for you? What resonates with you particularly when things get challenging? How do you work through that sense of meaning?
What I discovered, especially during lockdowns, when we only had that 5 kilometres around us, that was when I did these ISO walks that a lot of you would have done, and I discovered this fig tree in the Botanic Gardens, a beautiful tree. And it was a very difficult time, as it was for a lot of us. There were lots of grief and losses we were all going through. And my sister died during that period. And that walk became essential for me to cope with the grief and the loss. I've carried on that walk every day, and that tree's become very special. And walking, as we know, in nature, bathing ourselves in greenery and in woodland is very, very comforting and relaxing and good for our overall well-being. But the important thing for me is the sense of gratitude and being present in the moment that sometimes you can lose when you're working in a journalism media world where it's always next, tomorrow, the next deadline, rather than being present in the moment. And when I'm with my tree, because it's so still and always there in the same spot, it centers me and calms me. And so I'd start all my days that way. So by the time I've come into the office, I've got a sense of the big picture in the world, rather than only thinking about my work and my, the outcomes that I want from my work. So even if it goes well or goes badly, I know the planet is still turning and the sun is still going to be there tomorrow, and the tides will come in and the tides will go out. And having that real present reminder of that helps with whatever challenge that I face during my day. So that's critical. The other thing I've developed too, Sophie, is I have developed sort of different spaces to inhabit during my day. So if one part of my day isn't going well, for instance, you would have heard that a number of cuts have been announced at the ABC, and there's a lot of anxiety at work in various departments. And so the way I look at the ABC is this key cornerstone of democracy. At the moment, I'm feeling that that's been challenged and under attack. And so if I spend too much time in that sphere, I can feel a little flattened and my energy and my positivity decreases. So I move myself into the other stratas, which is my main role as being a journalist and broadcaster, I feel, is telling stories, hearing people's stories and telling their stories. So I move myself into that area. And so when I hear a story, someone I'm chatting to on the radio, and I feel really enlivened by it, and I know that I've brought their story to hundreds of thousands of other people who wouldn't have heard that story, and so then I feel really enlivened and positive about my day. And then sometimes stories don't go well and you don't get the guest you want, or it doesn't work out. The other area I love inhabiting too is just my own creativity. So sitting down and playing with my pebbles and my shell collection, or doing some painting or drawing and making it a very internal, or sitting under a tree and doing a bit of writing. I love being in that space as well. And so what I find is I create these different stratas that my creativity can feel activated and enlivened in.
Yeah, this was a good point that we were talking about, because sometimes with creativity, one thing will work well for you, but then you try that again, you're like, oh, I'm just feeling really flat. This isn't working well for me. And so having a number of outlets to be creative can be so valuable, can't it? Because that way you can have, if one thing's not working, you can go, okay, like for me, the default when other things aren't working, writing's my default. I know I can always just put pen to paper and then I'll feel good afterwards. So that's for me. If other things aren't working, I'll go, okay, let's just write something and write out what I'm feeling and what I'm trying to process, and I'll feel so much better.
Yeah, and you want to have wins in your day. So, on my fridge, for instance, I have a list on my fridge, and it has the big things, and I've got to attack my tax and go through super concessional rates and all of that. That's on my list, but right next to it, I saw it as I rushed out this morning, buy milk. And it was really good because I know I can buy milk, I can do that, and I can come home and cross that off the list and feel like I've achieved something, even though I've got all my tax still sitting there. And I think it's really important to structure our goals for our day or in our workplace in the really simple things we know we can achieve, mixed with the complex things that are a bit more challenging. Because as soon as you give yourself a win, you feel so much enlightened.
Exactly. You get that
now that I bought milk, I'm
yeah.
ready to tackle my tax. And it's almost playing with your
Can you
head.
do mine next?
No, I got to get done with mine first. But yeah, I think it's trying to create those spaces that you just ease up on yourself, relax a little bit, and give yourself the opportunity to feel good. It may be a plant, it may be a list of achievable things in the list of things. It may be an interaction with a colleague. It may be stepping into a natural setting, whether it's on the beach or under a tree. But factor those little things into your day, and it'll make the harder things just so much more easy to deal with.
Yeah, I love that idea of taking the small wins. And sometimes, if you have a to-do list and you think everything is important on that list, then ultimately nothing is important. If everything is equally as important, then nothing really matters. Whereas if you can pick, say, a small win and then tackle the more challenging thing. And thinking about what's important and urgent, putting that at the top of your list. And I also love the technique, it's called like the big rocks technique, where you think about it from a business or a workplace point of view, what's the biggest thing I can tackle that's going to move me closer to my goal, my big goal? And putting that at the top of your list. Because often we get so caught up in the day-to-day that the things that really matter get further and further down your list to do list.
And often great creativity doesn't come through anxiety. It comes from actually being relaxed and being calm. So you're pushing against it. If you're wanting to be more creative but you're anxious about it, it's not going to come. But when you're calm and you're relaxed and you're just sitting, that's often when you'll get the solution or an idea that has been eluding you.
It's so interesting. Like when I was working full-time at ABC, often I would just take a break in the lunch hour, and when I had the time, and go over to the gym at UTS and just walk on the treadmill and just sort of get out of the office. And then that's often when I had the best ideas, and I'd come back to my desk and go, oh, now I know how I can solve this problem, or now I've got a great idea for this story. But I think it's that action of just sometimes moving away from being so hyper-focused on what you're doing that you can actually get that sort of spark of
And even
creativity.
the other day, I was looking at one of these cuttings growing in the vase and thinking, isn't it amazing? This plant gets everything it needs from just being where it is. It doesn't have to rush around everywhere. It's getting its food, nutrients in the water, it's getting its sunlight. And here I am thinking that I'm so much better and bigger than a plant and so much more evolved. And I'm running around everywhere. Oh my God, I have to go to the supermarket. I have to go pick up the kids. I have to go here. And I'm just getting so stressed. And here's this very calm Zen plant getting everything it needs just by being where it is. And so for me, that's also a really important reminder, having that close to me in my workplace, that sometimes just being still could be the answer.
And we were saying earlier as well about, you know, I've got 4 sons who are all in their 20s, and most of them are really into plants, and a lot more than I was when I was growing up. What do you think is it about that generation, and like your stepkids as well, that they're more into nature and plants than we necessarily were?
I mean, I think that this generation and, you know, the last couple of generations are much more aware of the climate emergency that we're in, and they know how important the natural setting is, you know, what we've done to the planet, what we continue to do to the planet. So one of the ways that I've found in a lot of my sort of nature teachings is that you can help people feel more connected if it becomes a experience they physically go through themselves. So caring for a plant, setting up your own garden, gives you such an amazing insight into, oh, right, now I understand what it means by not having water and not raining, or it being too hot. And you start seeing the planet's systems.
It back to basics, doesn't it?
It really does. You start to see what food is, what it takes to grow food. You start valuing our farmers and our food growers a lot more in the system. You understand waste, because you know it's taken you 3 months to grow that eggplant. You're not going to waste a single bit of it. Whereas so often we just throw scraps into the bin and we don't care about where it's going to go. So the more that we can be directly connected to a lot of these systems, we're going to bring about the important changes we need to make on our planet. So these younger generations understand that. Yeah, so I love the fact that it is the younger generations in our newsroom that really get my weird little plant cuttings everywhere. You know, they're very connected to it.
Yeah. Well, look, we're almost out of time. Anything else that you wanted to add just before we go? It's been great having you to chat with today.
I think that what I want to say is that, you know, a workplace can be uninspiring in so many ways, and a lot of us have found joy again in our homes or in our local communities and neighbourhoods, and it can be really hard. Why do I really want to go into the city, sit in the traffic, get on the train? What am I going to find there that I don't have at home? And I know that I sometimes have those thoughts. And what I'm loving about being back in an office with my colleagues is the physical interaction, because the best creativity for me comes when I'm physically with my colleagues, not on a Zoom meeting or an email exchange. And those incidental moments of just bumping into people when you're talking about the plants or you're in the kitchen, that's where my best creativity, my best ideas, our team's ideas tend to come from. So I really encourage people to embrace being together in groups and in teams again. It is really the joyous part of all bits of life, and I think that work can embrace that, you know,
Yes.
as well, with more people coming back into our workplaces, making them places you want to be in as well.
And I think that's what we're seeing with co-working spaces as well. I think that's why we're seeing more co-working spaces pop up, because there is that recognition that we do want to be, you know, humans, we thrive being with other people. And, you know, even though we might like being at home, we actually probably are more creative when we're with someone, and even if it's not your teammate, it might be another team
Exactly.
that you can work with in a co-working space. So lovely to chat to you.
Yeah,
Everyone
thank
give
you,
Indira a
Sophie.
big round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
You think of me, 'cause I'm feeling better.